I will continue my review of what I think is tormenting so many people and making life on various parts of the planet very, very challenging. Why there's so much hatred, dissension, protest, desire for a political strongman blowing up everywhere, and why the human race is going through such terrible turbulence at this point in history. I don't know. I think I may have said last time I was born at the turbulence of the Great Depression, and I'm probably going to end my life in a period of terrible, terrible animosity, turbulence, chaos, and insecurity and instability. So I will continue reviewing what I think are the factors that are contributing to this. I was using the story of my wife's aunt's life last time to try and illustrate some point I'm making. I think I talked about her life from the time she was born in a tiny town in rural Arizona, when Arizona was only a territory, not even a state, up through taking her towards the brink of and maybe into World War II, which of course she lived through. And World War II was a time of tremendous upheaval and transformation. The biggest transformation, at least in the life of people in the United States, was there were several parts to it. We were frightened we could actually lose the war. And that had a kind of interesting effect. It pulled people together who hated each other. We had a common cause, an external enemy, and there was major harmony on the home front where there had been terrible demonstrations, almost a fascist takeover of the government in 1940, sabotage by Americans of American property, the getting of weapons by militia, and with the planning going forward that the government was going to be abolished. We came very close to some of the same tensions back then, maybe even worse in that period, but that got mellowed out and ended as soon as the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor. Suddenly there was an external enemy, and the American firsters and the ones that didn't want to get into the war fell silent and stopped protesting. So the second feature of that time that's noteworthy is there was a large scale mobilization. 18 million men went into the armed forces. And since the population was a little over 100 million at that time, 18 million was a very, very significant portion of the population. We currently have men in arms of about 500,000. If we had the same proportion of people serving in the military at the present time as we did at the height of World War II, we would have about 6 million men in the armed forces, men and women now. Yeah, and women is the important part of that phrase, because with so many men going into the military, all kinds of jobs needed to be done that there was nobody to turn to except women. Women came out of the home in large numbers. Single women were immediately employed. Women with children, there were government-run baby centers so that children could be dropped off during the day while the women went to work. And women started to penetrate every part of the economy. It was not only white-collar jobs behind a desk answering phone doing clerical work, but they took over the most male-like kinds of jobs as well. They were pipe fitters on steamships that were being built. They were riveters on airplanes that were being assembled. They learned tank assembly, and they put the various parts of tanks together. And it was women who were running the assembly lines everywhere. And God bless them. My grandmother had to watch that going down too. At the end of World War II, there was a period that was unlike anything that had preceded it in the country for decades. First of all, there was peace. Second of all, there was great stability everywhere. Things calmed down on the planet Earth. There were some local civil wars going on still after the end of World War II, but there was no massive war going on anywhere. In addition, I felt proud of my country. We had learned special lessons from the First World War. At the end of the First World War, the occupying victorious powers extracted a huge price from the people who lost the war, the Austro-Hungarian Empire and the Germans primarily, and their economies were pillaged, and the proceeds of the war were distributed to the victors, and the people were left in despair and poverty in the defeated countries. We did not do that in 1945. I don't know whose idea it was, but General Marshall, who was one of the victorious generals in war and a very decent man, was named to be the administrator of what came to be called the Marshall Plan. And the victors in that war came to a different conclusion, that the seeds of World War II were planted when the defeated countries were reduced to poverty and meaninglessness after World War I, and we should not do that again. We should restore those countries to health as fast as possible. So instead of pillaging them and plummeting them into despair, we gave massive sums of money and all kinds of work projects, trying to bring their economies back to flourish and trying to bring them up to a decent quality of life. We did not punish the civilian population. The Nuremberg trials put on trial people who were held responsible for the atrocities in Germany of running the war in the way they did and of killing 6 million Jews. And many of them were hung, but the general German population was, quote, allowed to be denazified. Even people who had been part of the power structure in Germany were allowed to resume reasonable jobs in the new economy. And within a brief period our plants were not disrupted. Things were not disrupted here at all. Everything could hum again in a different way. The automobile plants resumed making automobiles and not tanks and airplanes. The boatyards started to make cruise ships for the entertainment and cruise industry that would come along, and good wages were available to blue collar workers, better wages than they had percentage wise or token wise, as they had enjoyed at any point in human history up until now. And the labor unions were very, very strong. So it was possible for blue collar workers easily to buy houses on the salaries they had and to enter the middle class as homeowners and property owners and to think about sending their children to college. And college was very inexpensive. I went to UCLA. I started in 1949, four years after the end of World War II. The community college tuition for going to community college back then was $3 a semester. I had to pay in tuition to UCLA, which was a first-rate academic and research institution. I had to pay $39 a semester to attend UCLA. In present dollars, that might be somewhere around $400 rather than $39, but that's not what UCLA tuition is like at all. It's up in the thousands and thousands of dollars. I think it's over $20,000 now. There's been an explosive expansion of the cost of tuition in the country. And that's one of the things that's wrecking our current economy, but that's a different topic for later. At any rate, there was a fluidity, a transfer of wealth that went on. The wealthy were taxed at a much higher rate to generate the excess funds to give as grants to the conquered nations, Japan, Italy, Germany, to aid the Russians to come back, because they lost 20 million people and they lost all their industry east of Moscow, because the Germans had penetrated almost to the gates of Moscow in the first phases of the war, and then left a scorched earth policy behind. So Russia had to be given aid and rehabilitated after World War II too, also. But when Trump is yelling MAGA, he's going to make America great in time. I think what he is talking about really is the mellowness and the pumping economy of the 1950s and the openness to allow people to do well in that economy. That was a wonderful time. However, it was not a wonderful time for people of color. There was a poignant article I remember reading soon after the close of World War II. It was written by a black man who had been a captain in the American forces. He'd come back to Los Angeles to resume civilian life, and he talked about how he'd been treated with contempt on the streets and spat upon, and told he was a nigger and he should get out of the neighborhood that he was in. And he was having trouble. He had the GI Bill and he had credits towards the purchase of a house, and he was having trouble finding any seller of a house who would sell him a house because he was a black man. So we were short of one of the things that happened starting late in the 50s and the 60s, starting the explosion of protests about the treatment of people of color in the United States. Change came. The other thing that happened was in the 50s and 60s, the women never wanted to go back to work again. Women who had tasted of being part of the economy liked the independent feeling it gave them to have their own income, and clamored for more work and more positions. And we transformed ourselves by the late 1960s for being a single worker family to becoming a two-worker family, as was the normative expectancy for getting ahead in the United States. By 1980, to go ahead, I was often shaking my head. One of the things that the Republican Party was constantly campaigning about was it was the party of family values. But I knew the research literature. The question was, what is a family? And by the 1980s, there was only 12% of American children were living in families where parents were married for the first time to each other, had never been married to anybody else. The marriage had been stable and children had come into the stability of this marriage. And a mother was staying at home and raising the children. The great ideal of the American family was being endured and imposed upon the children of only 12% of the population. 88% of the population were living in single parent families, widowed families, gay and lesbian families, step families, reconstituted families of one sort or another, farmed out to relatives or out for adoption. And so what the Republicans were yelling about was a myth. And the country was still living as if that's what a family was and what a family should be, when such families had disappeared mostly in the United States and never had been restored again either. We're not any different now than we were by 1980. So here again, my wife's aunt, she died in the 80s, was watching all these changes happening inside the country. See, she also was privy to other changes. My goodness, television was invented. By the end of World War II, television sets were becoming ubiquitous. They were just selling at a very, very rapid rate. It was unusual, even for poor families, not to have at least a small television set at home. by the end of the 1950s, radio ceased to be a particular force in many people's lives, and both entertainment, news, and other forms of information were being delivered via radio, by television rather. And by the end of the 60s, experiments with color television were starting, and then high definition, almost realistic television sets were being designed. At the same time, my aunt-in-law saw Sputnik put up and circulating around the earth soon after the end of World War II. With the German, and then many of the German scientists, rocket scientists, had been brought to the United States, and the space race started. And by the end of the 1960s, she saw first men going into orbit, and then at last an American landing on the moon. Something that would have been unheard of or even unthought of when she was a child. Finally, towards the end of her life, the first computers were being introduced, and the first cordless phones that could be carried around in an automobile were coming into fashion, and people were clamoring to start buying them and learning about them. So she died at that point. What I want to say is that the years of her life from 1914 to 1988, I like to think of as having subjected the citizens of this planet to more dislocation, more change, more craziness that never got sorted out, and changes that didn't get assimilated properly. Rapid pace of changing that was an exponential curve that started climbing and over her lifetime and is still climbing exponentially. There was more change, I like to think. I said this, I think, at her funeral. There was more change in how people lived and what tools they used in the years of her life than it happened in all the years of human existence before that. That 100-year period, a little less than 100-year period in which she extended her life. Now, human beings are not wired, I think, very well to assimilate change. And that is the underlying problem in various forms that is making us so churlish and unpleasant and difficult. We want to go back to some simplicity that we imagine, some era where things are gracious, people are peaceful, life goes forward, and the values and textures of whatever was that period in our life we want to recapture. And we can't, we never will again. Those lives are gone as we live them, and the only way we have to go is forward and to deal with what is on our plate. Unfortunately, what is on our plate is very, very troublesome. We have not a single source of distress on the plate of humanity. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 challenging, unsolved, very stressful problems that are playing in the background of everybody's life. The first is technology itself and the ongoing rush of technology. There was an article in the LA Times, an op-ed piece by three writing professors who taught rhetoric, debate writing, speech writing, and all kinds of tasks in the communications departments of their universities, taught these kinds of writing perspectives to students. And they were educating us that something is already happening. There is an artificial intelligence program now that can be purchased online, and it will write any letter or compose any email that the purchaser of the program wants. And they gave examples. You can say to the program, write a letter to and give the name of the person, because somewhere in your contact list is all the information about the person's actual address. Please write X and tell X I'm looking forward to the meeting that's coming up next week, and tell him the agenda of the meeting that we're going to share, and tell him how much I value his participation and how much I'm looking forward to being with him. So that is what you say, and the program writes the letter for you, and all you have to do is sign it, and it will even address the envelope. And they showed the example of the letter would come, and they said, it is usable, even in the present iteration of the development of this artificial intelligence. This requires practically no editing whatsoever. There is one mistake in this thing, that the program misunderstood a word of instruction that was given, but other than that, the letter is fine. However, the letter is not excellent. And they gave an example of an email that the thing had composed for on somebody's behalf. This is also workmanlike, but it's not excellent. Human beings are still the only ones capable of doing this in a very special, very personal, and very excellent way. But they said, unfortunately, we're not optimistic that the machines won't catch up, and that the program, as it's used more and more, will get more and more sophisticated and smart, so that the need to write anything may disappear out of the human lexicon of skills that we need to have. All we need to do is speak something to the program about what the final product is that we want, and it will spit out a final product. And the author said, we're looking forward to next year. We're going to go back to the program and tell it to write an interesting novel about, and give it some broad outlines of the novel, and see what kind of novel it writes, what chapters it divides up to, what story twists it puts into it. And they said they're betting on the machine to make us extinct with regard to writing. So that just was a small example of what technology is doing. More and more jobs are being taken over by machines that will do them. White collar jobs, some of them, and certain kinds of jobs in factories, certainly. Assembly jobs are being done by robots. And the robots even diagnose themselves about when they need a repair, and a repair robot will come and repair the robot that needs a repair. So we are eliminating jobs at a huge rate, and we have to live in a culture that begins to ask, what are we going to do when most people don't need to work anymore? What the hell is that going to do to the world? Because that's coming. Technology is going to get us there, whether we want to go or not. My favorite current example is everybody is competing to try and work on self-driving cars. And I can put together two things quite easily. The cars will be self-driving and they'll be electric. And what's going to happen? There's probably no longer going to be ownership of cars. There'll be no need for ownership of cars. You'll tap something on your phone, and a self-driving car will show up in your driveway within 10 minutes of you summoning it. You will have told it where to take you, so the door will open, you'll get in, and the car will drive you to your destination and then let you off. So what's going to mean to be an automobile manufacturer? Many fewer cars will be needed. If nobody needs to own a car anymore, because they're going to show up by word of mouth and just show up if you tap something on your phone, you don't need to own a car and pay insurance and all the rest and have to get it serviced and go through all those headaches. So the manufacturing companies will still manufacture them. Are they going to sell all their cars to something like a Hertz, a rental car company that's going to manage the ownership of them, the servicing of them, and how the cycling them out into the community and back again goes? Or are the manufacturing companies themselves going to just keep ownership of the cars after they're manufactured and ship them to the various communities, to lots, and run the lots as part of the car business that they're engaged in? I have no idea what's going to happen, but I'm certain within 10 or 15 years that's going to be going on. Everything we're doing is going to be transformed, and at a very, very rapid pace. So technology is going, I just gave a couple examples. Technology is going to keep making more and more changes in how we conduct our lives and what we do. I'll go to medicine. My poor brother-in-law is now having to fight maybe the cancer that's going to kill him, maybe the cancer he'll be able to escape. He's going to need surgery both on his lungs, where some of the cancer is, and he has a large tumor in his stomach too. The surgery is going to be done now robotically. The physician will be sitting at a console with his hands in something that will work the robot's arms, and the robot will make a small incision so they don't have to make a major incision anymore, and a tool will be inserted in the abdomen, and the thing will go to the site, and the surgeon will move it this way, that way, and the other way, and the tumor will be cut out with an incision of not more than 2 inches big, and a claw, they'll take the thing out, put a claw on it, it'll grab the severed tumor and it'll pull it out through the hole, and only a couple stitches will have to be put in this wound. 10 years ago, that would have required a major cutting open of the entire abdominal cavity to be able to do what that tool now does. So the training of surgeons now is changing to adapt to the partnership with machines in order to carry out whatever is being done in the medical domain. All right, the march of technology will make us crazy and stressed. The second thing I want to call attention to is what I call overcrowding. At the time my aunt-in-law was born, most of the United States was empty land. There was a concentration of a heavy number of people in some major urban areas, but there were farms outside of that and very little population density. Now population density is getting heavier and heavier and heavier, and the cities are sprawling larger and larger and larger. I think now the average Japanese family lives in 400 square feet because land is so difficult in Japan, and there's so little empty land for people to live in. We're already repurposing here in Los Angeles. We're repurposing single-family dwelling zoned premises. We're now allowed to build auxiliary residential units on the property or single family, so we can rent out a separate structure or have a separate something. An office could be there, anything, but we are making more habitations on single family residences lots than we used to. Everything is about piling more and more people into smaller and smaller space. And the world's population is up from about 1 billion when World War II started to 12 billion now at the present time. And it shows signs of slowing down, but it's slowing down in lopsided ways. The so-called developed countries that are based on technology have falling birth rates. The birth rates are producing a slow population contraction. Even China is going to need immigrants by the year 2050 because it went to the stupid single child policy, and now it's going to pay a price. It's not going to have enough people residing in China to run its own economy by 2050. I'm sitting here saying the machines may fill in the gap by then. Maybe it won't need more people by 2050, but based on how things are done currently, by 2050, it'll be short of population. And I don't see any way that we're going to curb population overcrowding. The countries that can least afford it, the countries with the smallest gross domestic product are making the largest number of babies. Because that's an old human philosophy. We need to have many babies because there's large infant mortality. Many of them just die in infancy anyhow. And we need somebody, if we unlucky enough to get very old, we need our offspring to take care of us because there are no other institutions that will. So it's safest to have the little ones because you can get them to do many chores. If you're in the rice paddies, they can learn how to plant rice at a fairly young age, and you can have a better economy for yourself if you have many child workers who are part of your clan. And that philosophy, I think, is becoming ridiculous and extinct, but it still obtains in many parts of the world. The next conundrum and terrible thing we're dealing with is global warming. And I don't think we're going to get anywhere much in solving the problem. I think there's going to be terrible difficulties that happen to us before we'll do the draconian things that are necessary to take a grip on the problem. I think we're going to have wars over food, wars over water, riots in the streets when people are afraid of going hungry. We're going to have lots of damage done by weather change, rising seas are going to put Florida underwater before the sea rise stops. The whole peninsula is going to be underwater. And I'm not impressed that we have the will, the wherewithal, or the whatever it takes, the camaraderie to do anything about anything really significant in time about global warming. Next, there is world travel and intermarriage. Used to be that people were born, lived, and died in a fairly small radius of where they were. Some people live migratory lives, like the Bedouin and the Sinai Desert, but most people lived attached to the land after agriculture was invented and stayed stuck where they were. We have invented more and more efficient ways of letting people move around the globe. And I am sure we will get to the point where we have a 4-hour possibility of some kind of flying machine we'll get from New York to Tokyo in 4 hours. I'm sure that's coming. So the prices come down consistently of moving from one place to the other. And the accessibility of leaving where you are to go somewhere else becomes easier and easier. And now, as pain is happening somewhere on the globe, lots of expats leave that place and they go to the first place they can arrive at where it's more comfortable and their survival is not necessarily going to be at risk. So the mixings of the people everywhere is apparent. One of the things I love about this city is I think we got people here from practically everywhere on Earth. They've come here because the climate is nice and it's been relatively easy to get here, and it's pleasant and there's economic opportunity. So we aren't living in the midst of others who are like us anymore. And we may have small ghettos so that people from other places like little Chinatown or Koreatown or let's see, Beverly Hills is now a haven for Persian Jews who are living in Beverly Hills. There are local little ghettos, but mainly people are mixing on top of it. And people are intermarrying. The leaders of every ethnic and religious group cry out against intermarriage, but it doesn't stop intermarriage. And I am sure we cannot return to the days where there was an upper class and a lower class, and people who live here could be marginalized and beaten and killed by cops and with impunity, and that's not going to work anymore. We are becoming the other, and we are marrying with the other, and it's going to go on and on. I figure it'll take 1,000 years, but we'll all be one color and speak one language by the end of that time. That's going to happen. And we can't go back to the cross-section of what the world was like before that was possible. Not going to happen. Another thing that's taken place, this saddens me, is there's been a tremendous transfer of wealth. It used to be in the United States that the upper 1% of the population were in charge of, I think, 92% of the gross domestic product of the United States. And the rest of us shared and took responsibility for 8% of the gross domestic product. That number is now up to 96% that the nation's greatest wealth have control of. And the rest of us get the leftovers after that. And back in the 20s, 30s, 40s, those numbers were much closer together. At the time Reagan took office, the highest tax rate, income tax rate, on the wealthiest in the country was 75% tax. I know in the Scandinavian countries, no one is, well, that's been adjusted for inflation a little. No one in the Scandinavian country is allowed to make more than $200,000 a year. The balance over that is confiscated by the government. They have not been engaged. They've been trying to fight against a transfer of wealth and to provide a good, safety net for the least advantage among them, so that nobody has to be desperate about being in poverty or going without meals. We have not been willing to do that yet. That's not a characteristic of American inventiveness. Here, it's just work hard and you'll succeed. And that's a bunch of crap. The deck is stacked against you, and working hard is not going to ensure that you succeed at anything. So the transfer of wealth is a big stressor. Too many of us live on go from paycheck to paycheck and worry about sliding in and out of poverty and worry about going hungry even. The next thing that's happening that's making people crazy and stressing them is the ability to manipulate and to understand fertility. We now can do fertility in a test tube. We have now opened up the notion of what is human sexuality. It is not rigidly binary, perhaps. Maybe there are gradations of different kinds of human sexuality. Maybe it's okay for people to have sex with the same sex partner and to fall in love with the same sex partner. A bunch of notions that were considered perversions or really disgusting things that somehow God had made a mistake or something horrible had happened to somebody to get stuck with such a destiny. Maybe we're beginning to believe that's just the nature of being human, that a certain portion of us are going to be wired differently, called in different directions. And maybe in the future, we will uncouple sexuality from child rearing. Maybe all babies will be born in test tubes and raised in artificial wombs and then adopted. Who the hell knows? We could go there. We're not far away from being able to do that. And maybe sexuality will become only a pastime that people do because it's pleasant to engage that way. But when they get serious about having a child, they'll go to the laboratory, they'll give the specifications and what they want the background genetically of the child to be. The child will be manufactured in the laboratory. And when it's born out of the machinery that carries it to term, the couple will pick up the child, or the person will pick up the child and take the child home. Brave new world. Even the possibility that this could be how the culture evolves is terrifying and making people angry as hell. They want to yell, no, turn the train backwards on the track, go backwards, go backwards. What a terrible outcome. The manipulation of fertility and the fluidity of sexuality is the last one. That is my seven enumerated horrible life stressors that we all have to confront, know exist, cry out and protest about, or throw tantrums about, or engage in the stupid idea that if we just murdered Congress and put autocrats in charge, somehow the timeline of everything could be turned backwards, and we could all live in an idyllic past time that we can think about in memory or remember from books we read or movies that we saw once existed in this earth. And some strong man or strong woman would know what to do and could make it happen. And we're willing to kill to get there again because it's so stressful to us to imagine. It's horrifying to imagine the running of the course of these things I have enumerated and what it's going to do to us and what new skills we may have to learn, or what things we may have to do without, and what new things we may have to adapt to. It's too much. It's too much. Stop it. Stop it. I want to get off. Oh, God. I don't have any answers. One of the wonderful things about giving this lecture today is I'm talking to two smart people, and I'm sure either Aaron or Scott or one of both of them will have perfect answers for what to do about all this. I think I'm done for today. I'll be glad to turn it over to you guys.
I have 2 points to make. One is that as I was driving and doing some errands today, I was tuned into the Christmas station on my radio,
Yeah,
and playing all the Christmas songs
yeah,
that I've heard all of my life. Some old, some new, some
yeah,
country, some rock, and they still exist. And tonight, even though my daughter says she's got stuff to do, we're going to Candy Cane Lane,
yeah,
where in some ways we take our car and turn off the lights, and we go through a neighborhood with all the Christmas lights that still
yeah,
exist. So some traditions are still here.
yeah,
The other thing, in terms of all the 7, I don't know, horrors that you have introduced, it's also a matter, Arthur, of perspective. And take fertility.
yeah,
My daughter, who just went off to her dance class
yeah,
and was in the Nutcracker last weekend, and the her dance recital for her school, who's very bright and is worried about her first B in geometry,
uh,
um, was an IVF baby,
yeah,
and she wouldn't have existed if we didn't have the technology,
I know,
probably, to help her be born.
yeah,
And we're so grateful, and she's such a wonder, and a cherished child, that in some ways we appreciate fertility, and the advancement of fertility, and all of the things that you listed. There could be kind of like the other side of that, the other perspective.
absolutely.
Yeah.
But change itself is very hard on people, and the idea of letting go what they've understood and what's been precious to them and exploring an unknown world is not easy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Oh my God. Look at what our clients do. Our clients come up to the threshold of beginning to understand maybe some significant change in their life is necessary, and there's a surge of anxiety when that happens. Oh my God, do I really need to do this? And what would that be like? We are, I think of children. Children do very well in homes where there are predictable rituals. You read Goodnight Moon every evening as part of tucking them in, and there's a certain animal that they want sleeping by their side, and the light has to be a certain way. Rituals and stability are very comforting to people. And I think that's true across the lifespan. We just want to be able to go on doing the same things in the same way over and over again. And if suddenly that's not available to us, I think we get very frightened and very restless. Uh, you mentioned the preciousness of Christmas season. Uh, that's a changing statistic too. The number of people who identify themselves as affiliating with a religion keeps going down, and whatever census data are taken and polling is done. It's now down to 32% of the American population says they have no religious affiliation. I bet you a lot of them, that's true for me and my wife. A lot of them will go through Christmas rituals because that's been a tradition and you celebrate Christmas. But I have no belief in that there was a Jesus and that Jesus is the Son of God and all the rest of it. The ritual came to be a nice part of being in this culture. So we will continue to follow a meaningless ritual. And yeah, a lot of the music is quite beautiful.
Yeah, I love Silent Night and Oh Holy
Yeah,
Night.
yeah.
Yeah. I could probably cue off 20 different things you talked about, Arthur. They're all, to me, very interesting and kind of, you know, I have a hard time staying optimistic about where all this ends.
Yeah.
You know, there do seem to be 80-year cycles. If you look at the our Revolutionary War, 80 years later, you got the Civil War. 80 years later, you got World War II. Every time there's about 4 generations, you get, you know, a war, and then you get a boom time, and then this kind of cycle. So I don't think we're heading for anything particularly great right now. And that wealth inequality, Plutarch said, and I looked up the quote real quick: "An imbalance between the rich and the poor is the oldest and most fatal ailment of any republic." And right now, our imbalance is way worse than the Roman Empire.
Yes.
Significantly worse than the Roman Empire's imbalance. So there's a lot of forces at work here, and the population's collapsing in general, especially in the West. The Japanese sell more adult diapers than baby diapers. We're only stable because of immigration. Italy and most of Europe are done. They're collapsing. China's even they overestimated their population, admittedly, by 100 million people.
Oh,
So yeah, so there's and the robots can do the work, but our whole system has to change because we're designed in this capitalistic way to have consumers.
yeah.
And old people don't buy a lot of stuff. Apex consumers are 20s and 30-year-olds that buy the most things. They're like the big purchasers. So there's going to need to be big changes to how we structure our economies, and a lot of big stuff coming.
It's not visible to me. Is anybody at all or any think tanks working on that?
Yeah, I'll send you some links.
Okay, thank you.
But you know, we're going through some what we might call decomplexification and deglobalization. To the extent that things were very globalized, that's slowing down. I think, you know, because basically the United States doesn't have the we don't have the desire anymore to really kind of maintain that global order, and other people don't like it, shockingly.
Well, I have 2 more things now that are on my mind listening to this. One is I never took a course in economics, so I know it's called the dismal science. I never studied economics, but there is a principle that I see playing out in economic planning over and over again that seems absolutely crazy to me. That is that the gross domestic product of an entity, a nation state, should be growing at the rate of about 2% a year, and that makes
Forever.
what?
Forever.
that makes things healthy.
Uh,
And it makes for a good quality of life for everybody, and it keeps inflation at bay, and everything is mellow if it keeps growing at 2% a year. But then I think the planet is finite. I mean,
mhm.
there aren't an infinity of resources on the planet. How do you have a constantly expanding economy without running out of resources? It just seems impossible to me. It's a crazy model. Is
Yeah,
anybody planning a steady state economy where things would be mellow if we could keep a steady state going?
yeah, that is the biggest challenge, I think. And so I think some of the estimates are that we could probably achieve that with 1 billion people on this planet.
Only with 1 billion people on the planet?
Yeah,
So we have to get
that
rid of all the rest.
we don't
They,
have to. I
they
take
will,
care of myself.
they will die out partly. They will get killed in wars and catastrophes.
Yeah, or maybe our technology,
Hmm.
I mean, that's our last bet here is to can catch up. Maybe, some nuclear fusion comes online and we can kind of get energy sorted out and make this work. But if you look at that hockey stick going from under 1 billion people on the planet to 8 billion in 100 years, it's a big challenge.
Yes, it is. All right, my second thing I've been thinking about, I'm gonna give a recommendation and a pitch to something. Have you two guys ever watched Rachel Maddow do the news on MSNBC?
No. Mm-mm.
Mhm.
Okay, well, I'll give you her name, Rachel Maddow, Maddow. And she has a podcast of 7 chapters. And it is so powerful and so upsetting. It's about a time I lived through, and I was too young to be more than just partly aware of what was going on. Oh, the name of the podcast is called Rachel Maddow Ultra, ULTRA. It is the unveiling of a period of US history that started in about 1936 and went on to 1942, a 6-year period. We came so close to becoming a fascist dictatorship in this country that I don't think is well remembered. And she details all the parts of it. Starting in 1936, it was apparent that Hitler was arming and that World War II might come. And the country started to split apart between those who wanted to stop Hitler or do something about Hitler, and those who quite sensibly didn't want any part of another world war, wanted to try to avoid it if possible, and certainly didn't want to do anything that would be likely to pull us into war, like aligning ourselves with one side or another in the disputes that Hitler was having. During that period of time, there were those who belonged to a movement called the America First movement. And it was opposed to international alliances, to rendering any aid to anybody. And there was, in the American First movement, very strong anti-Semitic tendencies. One of the speakers who became a leader for the American First movement was Charles Lindbergh after his flight to Paris. And he was saying in his speeches many of the lines that Hitler was saying, and admiring Hitler as understanding the Jewish conspiracy and the Jewish problem. And then there was a priest, Father Coughlin, from a congregation in Detroit, and he had a Sunday program for the laity. It was not a religious observance. It was his comments on the politics of the day, and he had literally 30% of the American population listen to him every Sunday. He had the largest mass media audience that's ever been known in this country. And compared to the present time, it would be like 1,500,000 people were tuned into some television program. Those numbers don't exist anymore. That many people strongly following him. And he was reading from Mein Kampf. He was admiring Hitler. He said that it was the Jews that were the problem, the Jews and the communists, and most of the communist leadership was Jewish. And Hitler had the right idea, and the Jews had to be exterminated. And he was allowed, because there's freedom of speech in this country, to continue lecturing. At the same time as the Germans were getting ready for war, the Germans sent many agents to the United States, and their task was to capitalize on dissensions and nodes of distress in the fabric of American life, and to get Americans angry at each other. Because if they succeeded in getting us angry at each other, it would be hard for us to pull together to do anything about what was about to happen in Europe. So they succeeded in making campaign contributions to many people in the House and the Senate, helping them with their speeches, giving them talking points that Hitler himself approved of. And 28 members of the Congress became spokesperson for Hitler's regime in Germany, and were making speeches on the floor of Congress and in their campaign speeches to their followers. By 1939, one of them was on an airplane. He was flying home to do campaigning in the fall, and he was feeling desperate. He told his assistant that he had painted himself into a corner, was acting very agitated as he got on the plane. The plane suspiciously crashed in a field in New Jersey and killed everybody. And only later, some weeks later, was it noted that somebody from the FBI and two people from the Justice Department were riding on the same aircraft with him. And the rumor started that he had been involved in something and he was about to be indicted. Well, later on, towards the end of the war, it became very clear that he had lied under oath, that many of his campaign speeches were written by a paid agent of the German government, and he had lied under oath and perjured himself. He had committed a felony, and he was in deep trouble. And it's possible the latest theories now, in retrospect, by historians, is that the plane was sabotaged, that he was being watched by the feds, and they were about to indict him, and they were following him to check up on what his next speech was and to confront him and to take him before the grand jury, and the plane crashed. In addition to what I'm describing to you, 100,000 Americans joined an armed militia that was sponsored by the American First Movement. They had armbands. Many of them went to meetings where they would give the swastika salute. There were pictures of Hitler on the walls of their meetings, and they were pledged to overthrow the American government and to put a fascist dictatorship in place. And the first suit, 18 of them were prosecuted by the Justice Department, with the Brooklyn chief prosecutor in the Brooklyn district, since they lived in Brooklyn, bringing them to trial. And they could not find any jurors to seat who believed that Hitler was wrong. Jews were not allowed on the jury. The judge himself announced that he had great compassion for Hitler, and he thought Hitler was a wonderful, heroic person. And the Justice Department could not get a conviction of the 18 people who were arrested and being tried for a seditious plan to overthrow the U.S. government. And they were hooting and carrying on in the courtroom, and the judge just let them be misbehaved and arguing and saying words and talking over the prosecutors. It was a nightmare of disrespect to the courts that went on in the courtroom. To the great delight, there were 10,000 people marching outside the courtroom in support of them. And when the not guilty version, for some of them, it was a not guilty version. For others of them, a mistrial was declared, but they were all let go And the leader of the group, who had had the most serious charges against him, as he was leaving the courtroom, says, "Your Honor, do you have my gun? I want my gun back." And the judge handed him back his weapon because there was no grounds for keeping it anymore. And the war came, and you would think, I experienced the war. Well, I experienced all the horrible hatred and anti-Semitism in the run-up to the war. From my perspective, when the war came, there was a growing mellowness and a pulling together and a feeling that we're in this together and let's stop bickering with each other. But the Germans didn't give up trying to neutralize the American will to fight and to come negotiate a settlement with Hitler. So, the Browning Company, they had designed the Browning automatic rifle. The Browning Company was an explosives company in New Jersey, and in addition, a gun maker for the military. And it was huge. It was the size of 50 football fields, the land that it sat on, and it was making explosives in the run-up for World War II and giving them to the Army. By that time, informants had informed the Justice Department that the movement had gotten hold of weapons for 100,000 people. It had built 2,000 pipe bombs, and it had automatic weapons too, because many people in the National Guard and in the military were very sympathetic with the America First movement, and were stealing and giving over equipment and ammunition from military stockpiles to the people who were going to lead the march and destroy everything. And there was now around all the parcels of the movement scattered in all the major centers of the world, an agreement on Der Tag, in German, the day. What is the day that the rising is going to take place, and who is going to do what? The Washington group was going to go kill all the guards around the U.S. Congress and attack the Congress itself while it was seated, telling the Congress they had to resign, vacate their seats, and come and join the movement. And those who refused to do that would be shot on the spot. So the Congress would either join the movement or members would be assassinated right there. They were going to go to the White House and do the same thing to President Roosevelt, and he was to resign or he would be killed, and they would shoot the Secret Service on the way in sufficient numbers. They had thousands of people willing to go and do this task. In addition, to show that they meant business, on the way to Der Tag, they would do some acts of mighty sabotage. So the first one occurred in the fall of 1940. And in the fall of 1940, the Browning munitions plant in New Jersey blew up suspiciously in the middle of the day in two separate explosions. And windows were broken in a 50-mile radius around the plant. The explosion was so tremendous, and a 19-foot hole in the earth was dug by the explosion. And people came to investigate immediately. And in the beginning, they couldn't tell whether it was an accident or an act of sabotage. They expected the latter. But then, exactly 2 months to the day, at the same hour, 3 other munitions plants in different places in the United States exploded. And now the Department of Justice knew that this was a combined sabotage plot and not just a set of accidents that were happening in munitions plants. So the Justice Department decided to move in early. They knew Der Tag was coming. And again, they arrested a large number of the ringleaders of the American First Unit and charged them with crimes and put them in jail. And they started to prosecute them. But some of the people who were being charged were members of Congress. And the members of Congress took out after the Justice Department and started preaching from their pulpit that they were being persecuted, that they were the patriots. They were only trying to help the government to become the government that the country needed, and the people should back them. And they warned the Justice Department that the Justice Department would be in trouble if they continued down this path. They had to cancel the trials. At the very minimum, as a token, they had to fire the chief prosecutor. And the Attorney General of the United States at that point in history crumbled and capitulated and fired the Attorney General. So the trial went on hold for the time being, and the people got out on bail for the time being. The war then came, and everybody got busy with other things. And finally, the Attorney General found his cojones at last and appointed a different person to prosecute. It was the guy who tried, unfortunately, and failed to get those 18 people in Brooklyn convicted originally. And I'm in the middle of this episode. He is again running into just unruly behavior, noises outside, people throwing bricks through the window of the courthouse, and a judge who's doing little or nothing to make the trial go through in any sane or reasonable fashion. And that I'm in the 6th episode right now. The whole story is that the government found itself impotent to be able to manage a real and dangerous insurrection. And it's fascinating listening. So I'm giving it a pitch. Any further comments?
No.
Okay, I will close again by an invitation because I think I am finished again temporarily. So I'm going back on hiatus. And I need to hear from anybody who wants to be notified when there will again be something new that I'm posting. And please send me an email to Arthur Kovac's office, ArthurKovac's OFFFICE at AOL.com. So I'll know you want to be added to the mailing list. The emailing list to be notified when there will be yet another additional program that I get ready to give. Thank you for paying attention, a few of you who seem to follow me with some religiosity of some kind. And have a good weekend.
All right, until the next time.
Okay.
Till
All
the
right.
next-
Until
Bye.
the next time.
Bye-bye, guys.